This 2x4 saved me $400. But before I tell you how that happened, I'm going to show you how to build the woodworking project that's selling for $400, all out of a single 10-foot 2x4. Let's go. So I'm gonna log this project down in the Woodworker's Chronicle. If you don't know about this book, it is a order tracking and project tracking book for woodworkers. As far as I know, it's the only one out there. This allows you to keep up with your cut list, as well as your order dates, material lists, etc. And then you can also sketch out the project. So if you do get a reorder of something like this, you can always go back and reference this material and not have to figure those measurements out, etc. So if you want to check one out, go to faithvalleytools.com. Look for the Woodworker's Chronicle. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is take a common pine 2x4 and I'm gonna cut 2 pieces, which I'm making 2 racks. So if you're only making 1 rack, divide all this in half. I'm gonna cut 2 pieces 36 inches long. When I cut the second piece, I always like to stack them on top, kind of flush up the end that I just cut, and then that way I can kind of bump that up with the saw blade and get those 2 pieces exactly the same. Next up, I'm cutting 2 pieces at 8.5 inches long. I do need 8 pieces total, 5.5 inches long, but which means I'll need 4 of these 5.5 inches long. But I don't want to rip 5.5 inch pieces. It's a little dangerous, a little hairy, so I'm going to just leave this one this long with the rest of the 2x4. We're going to rip that in half, and then we'll come back and cut those 5.5 inch pieces. Now I want to rip off this factory edge, or as you call it on a 2x4. It's kind of rounded over, so you want to kind of square these up a little bit. And these are actually pretty good 2x4s, but I do still want to square that up so I know what I'm working with here. See that kind of a rough edge on there? I'm going to get that off. I'm going to cut off both edges before we rip those in half. Before I cut these out, I'm going to throw on a ripping blade. It just makes things easier. It cuts easier. The ripping blade has more space between the teeth, rather, where the gullets are, so that it clears out that material, and it just makes everything go a lot easier. So if you have one, put it on. If you don't, check this white side out. It's a nice blade. All right, once I get the edges ripped off, I want to rip them down exactly in the center, as close to as center as I can get. So what I did was just measure from each side until I get the exact center. I like to turn the saw on and kiss the blade with the board, and then double check that before I make the final cut. There was a slight adjustment I needed to make, probably about a 32nd, but now they're as close to perfectly the same as I'm going to get them. I'm not building a clock. One thing you may have noticed that I didn't realize until I had made several cuts is I was wearing a bracelet. That's a huge no-no. You don't want anything dangling around saw blades or anything like that, so that has been removed. You may see it in the later cuts where it's gone. My bad. Now, because I had 8 of these 5.5 inch pieces to cut out, I went ahead and set up my stop block. This makes things a lot faster, easier on me anyway, and you can duplicate it over and over and get the same size piece every time. This is the Woodpecker Stealth Stop system. I don't know of any other stop block system on the market that I like more than this, which is why I bought it. It's just fantastic. It's all around great. There's a whole video on this if you want to check it out. Once everything's cut out, what I want to do is just kind of stack everything up, make sure it's going to look right, and then I want to sand this. But before I sand it, I want to use some CA glue, and because I know I'm staining this a dark color, I'm going to use a dark brown CA glue to fill any of these knot holes. That way these things don't break or bust out later on. This will also keep those knots from falling out down the road, especially because this is going to be in a bathroom in a wet environment, expansion, contraction, more so than other products usually. This will really help out. I won't bore you with this part too much, but I am going to sand this down to 120 grit. Now, use whatever sandpaper you like. I prefer the 3M Cubitron. I like it a lot, but I'm out of 120, but I do have this Festool Granite 120 in my handy dandy little organizer. Link in the description of that organizer. You'll thank me later. It's awesome. It is important to sand all of these pieces before we put them together, because after we put them together, it'd be really difficult to get up into the corners and around those edges and things like that, so just do it now. Now it's time for assembly. Now the first thing I'm going to do is make the C part. C, whichever way C goes. You know what time it is. Power tip time. Now one thing to note when you're assembling these is you want to make sure that they're all turned exactly the same way. So if you didn't cut these perfectly, basically 1.5 by 1.5 inches, which can happen because you're ripping both sides of the 2x4 down, and then you're ripping that in half. So the 1.5 inch thickness of the standard 2x4 is now, you've kind of, and the 3.5 inches wide, you've narrowed that down to about 3.25-ish. And so when you rip that straight in half, it's probably not going to be perfect, that's what I'm getting at, unless you make another cut to make it perfect. I didn't want to, so here we are. So just make sure that these pieces are the same way, because if you don't, what will wind up happening is one of these will be wider than the other, but when you turn it, you see they line up perfectly because we cut them all the same, but turned, you can see it's too wide, so it'll kind of make it look wonky. You don't want that. Turn them the same way, or just make another cut and make them all the exact same width. I'm just going to use a face clamp here. I really like the Craig face clamp. It basically holds two same size pieces together flush, so you don't have to worry about them moving on you. And then I'm just going to mark center of this board, measure down about 3/4 of an inch from the end, and drill a countersunk hole in there. And then I'm actually going to use another drill bit to get a little bit deeper because I don't want this pine busting out. So I want to drill that out just as much as I can. Then I'm going to use about a 2-inch long screw here, drive that in and tighten it to where it just is tight. You don't want to overdrive it here. And then after that, we're going to fill that countersunk part of the hole. This is a 3/8 inch dowel because I have a 3/8 inch countersink bit. We're going to fill that with a dowel, flush trim that off, also glue that in. And I'm putting glue on each of these joints. I'm going to use Boss Dog glue. If you don't know Boss Dog Glue Company, go check it out. It's pretty cool. Guy in his garage decided to start a glue company. I like it, so that's what I'm using. Now, when you get ready to assemble the two C's together, whichever way C is, you might want to put these together with the cross brace, cross piece, whatever, on such as this. I've chosen to basically put them together so that I have the cross pieces go in between the two C's, but you can stack them on top. If you would rather attach them that way, you would just make this 1.5 inches shorter. It really just depends on how you want it to look. I prefer this look, so that's the way we're going to do it. Now, to join the two cross pieces to the C's, it can be a little tricky because if you're just trying to hold this in the air, it just has a tendency to fall over. So you're just going to figure out a way to brace it. Now, what I'm going to do is on the previous piece, I just used one of the extra cross pieces from the first one, and set in the middle. On this one, I don't have an extra piece, so I'm just going to use what I got. And we're going to use the rack we've already made, stack them just like that. Now we can work on these two cross braces, and this will be supported. You don't have to worry about it falling over. Now I'm choosing to join these together with just wood glue and one screw. I think that's plenty strong for holding towels. It's not like it's holding a ton of weight. We're talking a couple of pounds maybe of 6 or 8 towels that will be rolled up in there. So it really doesn't need to be overly joined together. Now you can use dowels all the way through if you prefer. You can use dominoes if you have a Festool domino and you really want to go that route. You can put 2 screws in there or you can pocket hold it. You do you, but I think this is fine. Now where you've glued up these pieces, you want to make sure you sand this back off because if you leave that on there, when you stain this, that will be discolored. This will be a much lighter color than the rest of it. And so you want to make sure everywhere these joints are to go ahead and sand those. And it's a good idea just to resand the whole thing a little bit because if you had glue on your fingers and touched it, that will also show up. The next thing I want to do is round over as many of these edges as I can because you don't want them to be sharp because obviously you don't want them to basically cut anybody or splinters come off or anything like that, but you also don't want them like sticking into the towels and things like that. There are going to be a couple of places where the router won't reach. We're going to just fix that with some sandpaper to kind of match it up with this roundover. Now I got this roundover bit. This is part of a 4-bit kit that I always recommend from Whiteside. It gives you the chamfer, the roundover, 2 flush trim bits. This is probably the best pack of bits for the price that I've ever found. And I use these things all the time. I actually started with the Ryobi router, but quickly realized that I needed one with a smaller base. This Makita has a much smaller base, so that's what I'm gonna use because I can get into those tight areas a little further in. All right, now to hang these up, the customer, if you're making these for a customer, can do a few things. They can drill straight through these bars into their wall. Most people don't want to do that, so I'm just going to use a keyhole bit. This is a router bit you can pick up. I'll drop a link to this one. Now what I'm going to do though is drill a pilot hole that's the same size round as that keyhole bit, which is about a 1/4 inch around, and that's going to give me a good starting place. I've also marked off holes here 3 inches from each side. You only have to do this on one end. So 3 inches on each side and then 1 inch long for the keyhole. All it does is make that keyhole slot like you see here. It's fairly easy to use. You just need like an edge guide or something on your routers so that you get the same distance on each one. And I bet you nobody else's workbench looks like this when you're working on a project. Once we have the keyholes done, they're literally ready to finish. Now you can do whatever you want, paint, stain, etc. We're gonna do stain. I'm gonna go with the dark walnut, I think. But first things first, I'm gonna put some pre-stain conditioner on there. If you're using pine or any softwoods like this, that pre-stain conditioner will make the finish look a lot better. It won't be as splotchy, etc. So I highly recommend it. And then after that, it literally takes 15 minutes after you put that on, then you can go ahead and apply your stain. And I typically just use a rag to wipe the stain on. Now I'm gonna stain the backside first, that way when I flip them over, I'm gonna put them on these little paint cones, and that's gonna keep basically up off my workbench so the stain doesn't get messed up, but I wanna make sure to stain the backside first because almost nobody's gonna see that. versus the front side. And then I'll let that dry overnight. Just make sure you dispose of your stain rags appropriately because you don't want to pile them up, etc., because of fire, all that good stuff. To finish these towel racks, I'm using polyacrylic. This stuff is like water. It's very, very thin, so you're gonna really have to watch the runs on here, but it does give a nice satin finish, and it's very inexpensive and very beginner friendly to apply. Literally just take a paintbrush and brush it on, let it dry about 30 minutes, then put another coat on. I only done 2 coats on this because I don't think it's going to need much more than that. As you can see, you can do a whole lot with just a single 2x4, and these things come out absolutely beautiful. I'm very proud of these. Are these extremely complicated and detailed woodworking pieces? No, but that's the beauty of woodworking. It doesn't matter if it's just it takes a massive skill or minimal skill to make something awesome. If you're proud of it and something you made, saved you some money, and you were able to build it yourself or sell these for a profit, that's all that matters. As long as you're having fun making that sawdust, don't overcomplicate it thinking it's only a 2x4, I can't make anything out of it. As you can see, we did a really good job here with just a single 2x4. So how did this save me $400? There's no way those towel racks are actually selling for $400. Well, they are. On Etsy, my wife come to me and she's like, I need some towel racks for the bathroom. We're remodeling. And I said, I don't have time. Just find some and order them online, Amazon or whatever. Well, she gets on Etsy and finds these and are like, hey, are you sure you want me to buy these? Because they are selling for $200 each, $195, so round it up. I said, no, I'll build you some today. And so I took one single 2x4 and just cut it up as you saw and made these towel racks. Now, is it realistic to think that everyone can make these and sell them for $400 or $200 each? Probably not. However, I think a lot of times we as woodworkers look at the cost of this 2x4 and think, well, I can't sell that for a certain amount because we are not putting ourselves in the mindset of the customer. And that is where my wife's mindset was, the customer. Would she have spent $200 on a towel rack? Probably so, if there was no other way to get those. And that's the style and the look she wanted. So marketing to the right customer at the right time is key for selling things at a higher premium. And I think a lot of woodworkers get caught up in the fact that, well, it only cost me $8 for this 2x4 and I've got a few hours in it, so $30 max each. A lot of people do that and you're underpricing yourself massively by doing that. Again, I think that $400 is an extreme amount that this was going to cost. However, I know for a fact that they're being sold because there's reviews on those listings of that actual product. So he is actually getting $200 per 36-inch towel rack that I was able to make for $8. And speaking of mindsets and figuring all this stuff out on your own, it's very difficult when you first start a woodworking business to figure out where to sell things, how to price things, and actually put yourself in the mindset of the consumer. And that's why I started my own online course and community called Sawdust Startups. If you go to sawduststartups.com, check it out, see if it's right for you. We're going to teach you step by step how to build a woodworking business that's profitable and can literally change your life. We have a growing community there of like-minded people just like you who are all masterminding together to build woodworking businesses so that they can have a successful income on the side or even go full-time. We've seen major successes so far in the community. It's been absolutely amazing to see. Go check us out, sawduststartups.com. This woodworking project might be a good one for you to build and try to sell in your local area or online. Check out the free plans available. Let me know in the comments if you sell these and what you're getting for them. We all want to know. If you like this video, you got to check out my outdoor bench build right there. Clicking that box gets you the big old virtual fist bump. Thank you for watching.